Economics continues to be a very important subject for the science team, and additional aspects of science and economics have been addressed once again by Minnerva Zhou. This time, we'll spend some time on the cost and return on investment of service programs. Ms. Zhou.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hello again, everyone. My name is Minnerva Zhou, and I will be presenting on the costs and returns of service programs now. So the annual investment for volunteers in the Corporation for National and Community Service is about $2 billion. This is the main US government agency that funds and organizes many large national service programs, such as AmeriCorps, Senior Corps, and the Volunteer Generation Fund. Of these $2 billion, roughly $1.4 billion, or 70%, is invested by taxpayers, while the other $0.6 billion is invested by state governments and private donations and federal governments. As a review, looking at the returns of service programs, military service was found to have mixed results on individual fiscal returns. While these findings were mostly mixed, many studies found that there were generally a reduction in earnings dependent on education attainment. Civil service, on the other hand, also experienced mixed income benefits. However, the fiscal benefit to cost ratio, like the social benefit cost ratio mentioned before, was found to be generally favorable when accounting for the fiscal benefits provided by things like productivity gains and work hours from the volunteer programs. As we account for societal returns, as mentioned before, there's evidence of reduced delinquency and better health status among youth who do civil service. However, it was also found that there were mixed results on whether civil service affects education attainment and the development of life skills. Now, let's take a look at a couple of possible incentives in civil service programs. This includes things like legal repercussions, particularly on the mandatory side, education awards and loan assistance, supplemental health insurance or childcare, and employment opportunity. Looking at the demographics, we note that roughly 77 million adults did some form of volunteering through an organization recognized by the CNCS in 2017. Now, if we look at the demographics, we find that volunteers are mostly parents, and parents volunteer at a rate of 48% higher than non-parents. Volunteers are often more likely to be female, with 58% of volunteers being female, while 48% being male, as found in 2021 thus far. And we've also found that 36% of volunteers raise funds for nonprofits. In terms of race, national service volunteers in 2015, and note this is for ages 16 and older, were found to be predominantly white, as shown in this top bar here. And those who did volunteer often had some form of college education, as shown by these two top bars over here. So what are the key takeaways? The investment for the main agency covering national service programs, the CNCS, is around $2 billion, and roughly 70% of that is paid by taxpayers. There are mixed results for the financial returns of military service and civil service. And civil service has many societal returns, such as reduced delinquency, but also mixed effects on education and life skill development. Other key takeaways include that possible incentives, economic incentives for service programs include legal repercussions, loan assistance, health insurance, and employment opportunities. And demographic-wise, it is notable that volunteers in the US are mainly parents, female, white, and have some form of college education. Thus ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now have questions from the legal team. Mr. Bremner.
Thank you, Your Honor. And thank you, Minnerva, for your presentation. I just have one question. Could you talk about how the cost of a service program would scale with size? Are there any economies of scale at play?
Right. So as mentioned in my earlier presentation, upscaling the size of a service program would decrease the rate at which costs increase due to decreasing unit costs with larger programs.
Okay, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Mr. Satpathy.
Hi Minerva, thank you for your presentation. I have one question. How do you think the collaboration of both the government and the private sector in trying to organize this program would impact the cost or the cost and the ROI of such a program?
That is a great question. And as I mentioned before, I unfortunately do not know enough on the research in order to give you a great answer. Of the research I have found relating to this topic, a few studies note that discouraging personal gain seeking by private companies can help increase the success of joint investments between like private and like government enterprise like investments. However, like before, like with Ms. Stinglish, I can definitely look into this more for you.
Thank you so much. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Mr. Bremner, if you'd come back on screen, we have an extremely astute and alert jury, and they've gotten right to the nitty gritty here for you. So we have two questions for both of you to answer. We'll each ask you to answer each question. So the first question for Mr. Bremner and Mr. Satpathy is, will the costs be substantially different between the programs? What are your cost estimates, and are they going to be similar or substantially different? Mr. Bremner.
I can't speak to the cost of the exact cost estimate of the voluntary proposal. I would estimate that the pro proposal would probably cost more just in terms of sheer scale. In our cost proposal, we have a rough estimate based on just upscaling Minnerva's extrapolation, anywhere from tens of billions up to 100 billion. We're thinking, so what we did is we took her estimate for a service program at a smaller scale and multiplied it, and we found about 100 billion. And if we're factoring in economies of scale and decreasing unit costs, unsure exactly, but we believe it would be up to $100 billion.
Mr. Satpathy.
I think that's a great question, and that's something which every program, as it establishes itself, has to grapple with. And I am no economist to give an exact figure, as I don't want to give a small figure, nor do I want to give an astronomically high figure. But what I believe is that our program will definitely be a lot more expensive than the mandatory program for a couple of reasons. Firstly, our economic incentives are the main core factor for trying to bring people together and participate in the voluntary program, because we need a large pool of people to participate in this program. And these economic incentives include forgiving student debt, having access to better healthcare insurance, and having access to government fellowships, scholarships, and even future student debt, which makes it easier for people to take student debt and take part in educational activities. That is definitely going to be a major part of the cost. Secondly, we prioritize the fact that we need to create a safe space, and creating a safe space involves hiring unbiased and well-qualified facilitators to conduct the program. And also, everything cannot be on Zoom. Zoom, as we know, is not very conducive for mental health, and having physical spaces which will promote such engagements, because as we mentioned, these are very delicate interactions between different groups of people, and we do not want to compromise in any way to make sure these interactions and collaborations are productive. And that is also another added cost which will be factored into the program. And thirdly, since our program is not having a fixed term and is more variable, and the incentives as well evolve and become higher, and as the person participates more, it will all the cost will increase. And again, the economies of scale do play, if that's the correct word I am using. But the fact of the matter is, these costs are justified because of the cost of polarization, and how much drastically we would be benefiting the economy in the long run as we contribute to these costs for the service program.
Thank you very much. I have another question for both Mr. Bremner and Mr. Satpathy, and we'll also ask Ms. Zhou to stay on screen because we have a question for her after these next two questions. So yes, the jury is wide awake and alert, making us do some work here. Mr. Bremner, here's the next question. Is there a point where the benefit of the programs would economically outweigh the cost, regardless of whether it's mandatory or voluntary? In other words, are the programs going to provide sufficient benefit that the cost will be outweighed by that total benefit? What are your thoughts on how you can justify the program economically? Mr. Bremner.
So from a financial standpoint, in terms of just the pure economic benefits of our program, we don't believe that those benefits will equal the costs, but we believe that in terms of the total good caused by our program, in terms of polarization reduction and a lot of indirect effects on health, on government trying to just reduce a lot of the costs of polarization rather than providing a true financial benefit. We believe our proposal is worth it, but the pure dollar amount reflected by the output of our proposal might still be less than the costs.
Same question, Mr. Satpathy.
In order to answer this question, I think I want to draw reference to Minnerva's previous presentation about how in the 2018 US government shutdown, federal workers were delayed $9 billion in compensation. And that is a direct consequence of polarization. And if we were to let this polarization continue unchecked, the longest shutdown, which happened in 2018, could grow even longer in the future and negatively impact the society even more. Beyond just government shutdowns, there are a lot of costs involved in terms of violence, in terms of damage to communities, and those costs, when factored in, which are not exactly quantifiable and which should be quantified, would come to a point where the costs which are incurred by our program, which could be in hundreds of billions of dollars, would literally break even there itself. Furthermore, if we are not looking at this program as a short-term gratification or a short-term solution to polarization. As we mentioned, our program will seek to continue to stay for the foreseeable future and take care of polarization, which will come in different forms. And since we are focusing on building a sense of community and reducing those misconceptions and polarizing attitudes which people have, you automatically start seeing that communities are safer and people would start electing better leaders, because that gulf between Republicans and Democrats would start moving closer to each other, and leaders would be more cooperative. That's just on the political side. On the economic side, we are also providing people the opportunity to develop their skill set and keep up with the workforce as it continues to evolve in a very dynamic 21st century. We are in a world where technology is the forefront player in terms of how jobs are redesigned. And we don't want people who may be around 40 years of age or 50 years of age who didn't have the chance to work on computers in their bachelor's program to fall back and be denied the opportunity to keep up with the changes in jobs. And our program will allow them to join the workforce and productively contribute to the economy. These all factored in will lead to a point, again, in the long run. So we ask the people to have faith in our program, and we believe that the returns from our program will outstrip the cost of the program.
Thank you. Now a question for Ms. Zhou. Representatives of pro and con legal teams, stay on screen. We've got more questions for you. The jury is definitely active this afternoon. Ms. Zhou, you had a slide, and I don't remember which one, and the question doesn't refer to it, that refers to the racial proportions of volunteers in particular groups, are those volunteers being compared to the relative population of that group in the country? Do you know the slide I'm referring to? Could you refer back to that and what that shows? It's the racial proportions of volunteers and how what's it being compared to?
Yes, one moment. I believe this is in comparison to the total volunteer population. However, I am not saying this with very much certainty, so I would like to take some time to look at the source, particularly where I got this graph from, and check. So I will get back to you on that one.
Yeah, we'll have a session here in a little bit where we can provide updated information. So what slide number is this? I don't see the slide number.
This is slide number 9.
Slide number 9. So if you're able to do that, because we do have some time set aside for clarifications in a little bit. So if you're able to find that out that quickly, because the question was, are these proportions, how do they relate to the proportion of the different demographics to our national demographics? Next question for Mr. Bremner. Do your cost estimates take into consideration the possibility of increased military spending? I'm not talking about total program spending, but the question seems to be directed to specifically military spending. If there's a higher conscription rate for the military segment, as there might be increased mental health costs or other costs from military conscription for the number of people involved in that aspect of the program.
I do not believe that we explicitly included those in our cost estimate. As I said, our cost estimate was a very, very rough ballpark, basically just based on more civilian service programs, but it does include the cost that would be required to engage that person in the service in a civilian service program. So I'm not exactly sure how that compares to the cost of putting that person through the military as opposed to a civilian service program, but it does still try to account for everybody as we get if but those are good, definitely things that would be that we can look into and would probably be included in a more thorough cost estimate.
Thank you. And now it's time for statements. Mr. Bremner, your statement.
Yes, thank you. So, after all this discussion, after talking about education, psychology, sociology, we're back at what's going to make this proposal actually happen: money. Because beyond the science, beyond the theory, money matters, and people value their money. We respect that, and we value it too. A mandatory service program can seem daunting, but for everything Americans give, we want to give more back through polarization reduction, social benefits, and concrete results of service programs, because we value the contributions of taxpayers. We want to make sure that funds are being used as efficiently as possible. With a mandatory program, we can. Minnerva told us that as the size of service programs increase, unit costs decrease. They become more efficient as they get bigger. With a mandatory program, we can not only physically achieve more, but we can do so more efficiently, getting more bang for each buck that we receive from taxpayers. It's also important to remember that we are not just taking taxpayers' money and participants' time. We are providing stipends to make up for lost income that will go back into the economy, that will help that will act as income for participants. Additionally, in order to incentivize participation, the con proposal would spend money on participants for far longer than the pro proposal would through practices such as student loan forgiveness. Although, as much as I say things like this, it likely won't get out of your mind the simple fact that the cost of this program is high. This is true. But I want to make sure that something else is in your mind, that the cost of polarization is higher, and it's not a cost that we can bear. We on the pro team believe that the cost of doing nothing is greater than the cost of doing something. And we believe that we have an obligation to try to do something with our mandatory service proposal. Thank you.
And Mr. Satpathy.
Thank you, Your Honor. The pro side brings up a point that that our voluntary program would be more expensive in terms of, since we are trying to focus on forgiving student loans and other sorts of economics incentives. The reason why, and we agree with that, our program is going to be more expensive than the mandatory program. And I believe it's important to be transparent with taxpayers and American citizens about where their money is going in when they are trying to invest in this program, and assure them that this is not a short-term solution. We are not seeking to solve polarization which exists in 2020. We're seeking to solve polarization as it evolves through the years, because as a century progresses, as the decades pass, our society evolves and mentalities also change. Mentalities which were in 1980s, which might be considered regressive now, may soon change, where mentalities in the 2000s were aggressive for people in the future. And that ensures that our program continues to work through the years to provide people with that exposure to change their perspectives and keep up with the times. Our economics incentives don't stop at just a simple stipend. Student loan, as Madeline mentioned, is a crisis in the country, and it plagues so many people irrespective of whether they have jobs or not. And we provide the opportunity for a long-term gratification where people's because their quality of life improves because of less debt. And we're also providing the opportunity through skills development to have access to opportunities which will pay higher, which will give leadership skills, improve stature in life and in society. So these factors all combined, and along with the fact that we are reducing the cost of polarization year on year through making safer communities and providing less stereotyped interactions, we are not only reducing the cost of polarization, but also we are providing the chance for people to improve, and not just to the bare minimum, and keep up with the times and change, because our society has to keep in mind of environmental constraints such as global climate change, and also of the fact that our society continues to grow technologically. And that is why we believe our cost is justified, and the ROI will far outstrip these costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.